questionable ice on the big lakes cannot keep Tony Roach from finding safe ice. Today, Tony breaks down Minnesota lake basins and helps you find big crappies.
There we go. This week on Dialed In Angling, we are breaking down wintering basins for crappies. All winter long, hordes of panfish all across the Midwest will spend most of their winter months on a lot of lakes out in deeper water for good reason. There's warm water there. There's lots of bait fish, and of course there's lots of invertebrates out in this basin. I'm going to show you how to break down wintering basins, big or small, to put more panfish on the ice in this week's episode of Dialed In Angling. Wow, that's a light bite. Incredible. These fish are about 18 to 24 feet down, and I'm over like 31 feet of water. There's quite the school. When it comes to finding basin crappies, it tends to take a lot of effort on the front end, and then once you find them, the rewards are great. I spend a lot of time throughout the winter months drilling these wintering basins and spending a lot of time in front of the auger, punching holes until I get on that exact location or that exact school. You know, you'll see a lot of anglers, for example, they'll pick the deepest part of the basin and start there. I tend to start on the edges of the basin and then work deeper, but I'll drill a hole and then I'll just use the forward-facing sonar to kind of scan. You can see this school. I got some almost right underneath me. I've got some out 20 feet. Once I've located a couple schools, you know, these schools tend to just roam these basins. They're not fixated like they would be on structure. And so once I've located the school, I'll drill a handful of holes. I've got probably 15 or 20 holes here. The biggest thing is finding that school first before you decide to set up. Another one. I like to fish high in the water column too, just above those schools of fish, rather than ripping fish out from the bottom of the school. So if you have a bunch on the screen, like I said, they're anywhere from 16 to 24 feet. I like to kind of pick them off the top. That way you're not disturbing that school, and then you can quickly get back down there before that school moves on. If you tend to go past them, sometimes baits that come in their face spook them. Also, if you're ripping them out of the bottom of that school, a lot of times it'll spook the whole school and they'll have to move on and you'll have to find another hole. There he is. Hey, when we come back, I'm gonna show you how I break down my maps, things to look for, the best places to start in these wintering basins so you can track down these crappies all winter long.
Dialed In Angling, brought to you by Strike Master, VMC Hooks, Rapala, and Suffix.
Today we are breaking down wintering basins for crappies. In a lot of bodies of water, especially a body of water of this size, there are a ton of deep water holes in which these fish will live all winter long. They're out here for good reason. It's warmer water, there's lots of invertebrates, zooplankton, minnows that all congregate in these areas, and these fish just roam these vast basins. Now, using different maps helps me break down these areas. For example, I've got a map on my machine. It's a Lowrance that I've used for years that has a certain mapping technology in it. My graph, if you click over to here, all of the graphs that I have carry different chips with maps, and then also my phone apps. Now, all these maps have little bit different mapping technology, if you will, little nuances to the map. So I like to kind of compare and contrast and see which ones are the best. And then of course, once I find areas where I've located fish, putting down icons, that's going to help you track down different deep water depressions in the lake where you can go check other spots that look identical to the one in which you found the fish, keeping you away from the crowd and keeping you on more and bigger crappies. Even though this deep water depression area or this basin looks pretty small, it's actually really large. In comparison to this lake, it's small, but it runs almost a half mile. And there's all these little nuances to the basin. There's some high spots, some deeper areas. I want to find out where these fish are located, if they're up on the edges a little bit more, or if they're in fact in the very deepest part of this basin. So I'm using forward-facing sonar to not only track down these fish, but then stay on top of them. If I find them at a particular depth, I'm going to look and zoom my map out and find more fish in those same type of locations. It's amazing how aggressive some of these fish are. Oh, you drop it down and they just explode off the bottom. That's what I mean about keeping that up off the bottom a ways. Whew, nice fish. Oh, I love catching those huge crappies. The reward is great when you put in the effort and you drill a lot of holes before you decide to set up. There's so many times where I've just wanted to come out, drill a couple holes and start fishing. That hardly ever happens like that. You almost always have to get out, start drilling holes, start fine tuning, figuring out where these massive schools of fish are within that depression or that wintering area. Once you've found them, you know, if you're hole hopping like this, I usually drill like a grid system. So I'll drill it out that way. I have options. If I'm shining with the forward facing sonar, I'll see where those fish are. I have more options as far as holes. What a nice fish.
The iFish Pro has been out for a few years now, and what this allows us to do is to have a set line, but also use a rod and reel instead of a tip up. Hand over hand, battling a fish is fun, but when you're battling really big fish, it's nice to have a rod and it's nice to have a smooth drag. Ultimately, I believe it allows us to catch and land more fish. Now, I'm gonna dumb this down for you. How do we use the iFish Pro? Well, it's pretty simple. When I drill a hole, I immediately move the slush away and I set this right over the top. Then I bank this in. Now, when it's really cold, that's gonna freeze in a few minutes, but I have a smooth base, okay? Right after that, I determine which direction is the wind blowing, and I adjust accordingly. Now, the reason I do that is because when the flag goes, if your line is blowing around in the wind and it wraps around the flag, you risk the fish feeling that tension and ultimately spitting the bait. Now, the iFish Pro, it's pretty cool because it has 3 different settings based on what you're using. All right, this here is my setup. I've got just a plain hook and a split shot weight about 1 foot above it. And then I have the iFish Pro clip that slides up to just a standard bobber stop. Now, as far as the rod and reel, well, that's up to you. You can use just a regular spinning reel and open the bail like this, or you can use a bait runner reel. When the flag trips, boom, got a fish. I walk up real quietly, remove the iFish Pro, close the bail, reel down, set the hook, battle the fish, and have a lot of fun. It's really that simple. This iFish Pro is a deadly fish trap. Just remember, create a nice base and play the wind, and you're gonna catch a lot of fish.
Dialed In Angling. Brought to you by Strike Master, VMC Hooks, iFish Pro Tip-Ups, and Suffix. Hey there, Bill Shirk in with today's Dialed In Angling Ice Report. You know, when we started this segment of the show, the entire idea was to tell you about where the hottest bites are, but that thing called El Nino has screwed us up this winter. So far, we're just worried about finding safe ice, and it is a day-to-day challenge. Even this week up on Lake of the Woods, yet another ice rescue. We'll have details on that in just a couple of moments, but first I want to get to Nick Sakala, who is covering the Brainerd Lakes area. You've got some really good ice.
You know, Bill, we actually headed the trucks west this week, went out to North Dakota, and the ice we found out here is surprisingly better than we thought. I mean, we're seeing, you know, around 1 foot, sometimes even a little bit more of ice on these smaller pothole lakes. We perch fishing, walleye fishing, but at least we're on the ice, Bill.
Absolutely. Back home in Brainerd, I saw a video yesterday, big lakes, there's still open water.
Yeah, they are, but you know, there's still, you know, panfish opportunities on them smaller lakes. People are walking out, even getting some walleyes, you know, on them closer to shore spots. So there still is opportunity to catch fish, but using extreme caution yet is still very, very important.
Okay, let's head south a little bit into South Dakota, where guide Marcus Quam has been scratching his head so far this winter. Good news, I haven't seen you on ice before.
Yeah, we're getting closer. I mean, we're out checking this morning. Right here, I'm sitting on about 5.5 inches. We're definitely heading in the right direction. We don't quite have enough for snow bears right now, but there's definitely fishable ice.
Earlier, we mentioned a rescue on Lake of the Woods. Strike Master Pro Brian Beef Sather was actually on that call up there. Brian, what happened?
Typical early season ice conditions. Wind blows, you find an old crack, the crack broke open about 60 yards wide, and people were stranded on the wrong side of the crack. There was about 50 people we were able to rescue with the help of the Minnesota DNR, the Sheriff's Department, and our fire rescue out of Baudette.
Finally, it's time to check out Wisconsin. While much of the Green Bay area is still wide open, Captain Adam Rasmussen, you have been taking a peek at other areas. What do you know for ice?
I would say right now, if you're in Wisconsin and you want to get out and go fishing, I'd head up towards Hayward, Minocqua. Obviously, watch the big lakes. A lot of those are real sketchy or still have open water on them.
Tough ice conditions, no doubt right now, but with some of that cold weather in the forecast, we're keeping our fingers crossed.
Today on Dialed In Angling, we are definitely dialed in on these basin crappies. I'm showing exactly how I go about not only breaking down maps, finding these deeper depression areas, drilling holes, and then of course, finding crappies all over the place. Man, what a blast. There's one. He's coming up with it. I tell you what, crappies are my favorite species to catch all year long. You know, there's times where in the spring or in the fall, they're grouped up in big numbers. Well, winter is one of those time periods where there's giant numbers of fish roaming these vast basins. You just got to go about finding them in the right way. I try to stay away from the crowds. I like to do my research. Any information I can get to better me when I get to that lake. And even if it's a lake I fish all the time, I still like to explore new water. Wow, great crappies. Oh, there he goes. Nice fish. That just never gets old, man. Yeah, here they come. There we go. Entice that one. I don't mind working for them a little bit. Some of them just spring into action and crack it right away. Others, you got to work them a little bit more. I always watch them on my graph. You can kind of tell their mood. A lot of times when you find individuals like that, these are bigger fish, right? When they're really grouped up, a lot of times they're small ones, but if you can pick off these individuals, sometimes 2, 3 crappies in a school, they tend to be larger fish, larger marks. That one I worked hard. That's a really nice crappie, man. That's in that 13-inch range right there. That's a beautiful fish anywhere. Man, I love catching these things. Now that fish, all I did was lift my bait up. Crappies tend to feed up. You know, we've been talking about it all day, feeding high in the water column, fishing high in the water column, but also as they're approaching your bait, I just simply lift my rod tip really, really slow. I'm not even jigging that bait. Oh, another nice fish. These are just good quality crappies. Nice size, good color. That's fun. There we go. Had to work that fish a little bit. You got to stick with these crappies, you know. Jig really, really subtly at times, even though sometimes they fire up off the bottom. Like I said, I keep that bait just above them. Oh, nice looking fish. I keep that bait up just above them and then I'll work them. Even though if they start going back down, I'll kind of just bring that bait back up and then just hold it very, very still. You know, it's amazing how much your bait is moving down there without even you putting any action to that bait at all. These baits are always moving. I'm using a really, really small bull spoon right now. I like smaller spoons, jig wraps, something that I can get down there fairly quickly and see their mood. Now, if I'm dropping on these fish, let's say with a spoon or a jig wrap and they're not hitting it, I'll downsize to a plastic. But in a situation like this where I'm just hole hopping outside, it's cold out, things are icing up, I like to use a little bit heavier presentation. You know, when I'm fishing these small spoons, I like to tip the treble hook with something, whether it's a plastic, could be one maggot. So whether I'm using a spoon or a jigging wrap, I like to use something light. You know, I'm tipping this with a maggot right now, but I could easily switch that over to a small plastic. That's why we designed the Roach spoon with that marabou hair, something to draw their attention right to that treble hook, so they're gonna key on that treble and not hit the spoon sideways. You get better hookup percentage that way. There we go. That is red hot, man. I tell you what, everywhere we've gone, we have fished the Rattlin' Roach spoon with no bait, just to prove that that marabou treble catches fish. Look at that, no bait. I love the action of that spoon, that marabou treble. It works on all species of fish. Whenever I'm on a red hot bite like this, I always like experimenting, especially if I get new baits or new lures, or if I'm tweaking lures. I'm always trying new things, especially if I'm on a red hot bite, because that builds up your confidence. Catching fish equals confidence. So gaining confidence in baits, I have a ton of confidence in that Rattle Roach spoon. Woo. One of my favorite things to do in the winter months is chase crappies. Don't be intimidated by large bodies of water. They hold large fish. They hold large schools of fish. And don't be intimidated by vast basins. Pick out those depressions within the basin, start on the edge, start drilling holes. If you have a forward-facing sonar and an auger, you can track down these fish in big numbers, have a lot of fun in the winter. Man, I love catching crappies. Hey, until next week, I'm Tony Roach. Hopefully I got you dialed in.